Hello, my friends. It is Monday, January 6th, 2025, and this is the Daily Brief. My name is Gerdes. I'm just trying to provide context in the war in Ukraine. Kursk is the big story still. The Ukrainians have broken through a little bit, but not so far because they only have so many troops that they can be able to deploy there. Let's talk about that. But first, 1,550 Russians off the battlefield, 14 tanks, 45 armored fighting vehicles, 62 artillery systems, and 116 vehicles and fuel tanks. Now, let's talk about the numbers first. 1,550 doesn't even register in the top 20, and that's with all the, even with all the ties there, counted as ties, so that would be way down if you counted them separately. 1,550 is lower than the average in December, and most of December has been fairly low, except for yesterday. So that's where they are with casualties. Now let's look at the Shahed drones that were attacking Ukraine last night. 128 out of 128 shot down or suppressed by electronic warfare. So I'm not seeing images in the news about, civilian buildings being attacked and that sort of thing. 2 out of 2 cruise missiles also shot down. So it was a good night as far as air defense for Ukraine. When I look at Andrew Perpetua's list, I see something that's unusual. It looks like a little less than 1-to-1. Like usually it's like greater than 1-to-1, maybe at 1.5, maybe sometimes 3-to-1 Russian losses to Ukrainian losses. Here it looks like a little less than 1-to-1, that Ukrainians got the worst end of the deal. And that's very rare. It's unusual to see that sort of thing. Okay, Russia lost over 50% of its tanks since the beginning of the war, according to OSINT researchers. A large-scale investigation using the latest available satellite imagery showed that tank numbers in Russian open-air storage have dropped to 48% of pre-war levels. Of the remaining 3,517 tanks, only 279 are considered combat ready. Almost 2,000 tanks need refurbishment before they can be used. Another 1,200 tanks can only be stripped for parts. Now, that does not mean that, okay, so here, this does not mean that Russia will run out of tanks or other equipment, but it does signal challenges for them. Now, this is from Covert Cabal on YouTube. We're going to watch this. It's only a clip of about a little over a minute.
Tanks in storage pre-war, here's what that looks like visually. It just goes on and on. Speeding it up several times, we still only get halfway through them before zooming out. Today, in storage, they're down to just about 3,000, roughly half. And again, realistically, half of those can easily be discarded due to their absolutely abysmal condition they're in. While it's true it might be cheaper just to build a new one, the thing they're forgetting is the limited production capability. If, say, you need 1,000 tanks a year, but you can only build 250 new ones a year, well, then either you face having a serious shortage, or you have to accept spending more money to repair old ones to meet the demand. Obviously, there is a point, though, where the cost outweighs the benefit of just having another tank. And as Russia pulls all the best conditioned tanks from storage first, those remaining are in worse and worse shape on average. And again, that means they'll cost more and more to overhaul. So for Russia, that means they'll either have to face ever-rising costs for replacing lost tanks in Ukraine, or find a way to lower the demand. That means losing less tanks in war by not using them as often, or maybe conducting less offenses, or finding substitutions, which...
And they've been doing that, apparently. They've been using less armor because of the threat of drones, which is costing them more people, but they don't seem to be worried about people nearly like they're worried about the armor.
Will obviously have drawbacks, but that's the situation Russia is beginning to find itself in. And this is also why trying to predict when Russia will run out of tanks is pointless and the wrong way to look at it. As long as they can still produce new tanks, say again 250 a year, they'll never run out and always have at least 250 a year at their disposal. Instead, what will happen, and is already happening now, is a slow but ever-increasing shortage of tanks to fully equip their units, and face the consequences of that, such as not being able to conduct as many or as powerful offenses.
So that's where they are now, unless they rearrange their wartime production to expand that. So just take that with, this is the understanding of where they are at this moment. Okay. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian Navy destroyed 2 Russian Pantsir S-1 air defense systems and 1 OSA air defense system. And here's a video of the drone coming in at that. We'll stop it before it hits anything. But yeah, you can see where it's going. That's the system. And we'll stop right there. Okay. So Ukrainian forces enter multiple settlements in the Kursk Oblast, according to the ISW, and I reported about this yesterday. ISW confirms Ukrainian offensives in three Kursk Oblast areas with tactical advances countered by Russian attacks near Sutsa and Kornevo. So they are making some progress, limited progress. But before we go and look at more of that, Ukrainian soldiers monitoring via drones observed North Korean soldiers forcing local Russians in the village in the Kursk Oblast out of their homes to use them as shelters. Elderly residents were left in the cold while their homes became cover for North Korean troops. How about that? So it turns out local Russians who are now in the war zone don't like this. With Ukrainian forces now pressing further into Russian territory, the people of Russia's Kursk region suddenly want to end their genocidal project, begging Putin to stop the war. We asked you to end this war, which has taken many lives of innocent people. Dear Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, hear us at last. We want our children to see the peaceful sky and not constantly hear a signal of rocket danger. We are left homeless. Some of our relatives died, some disappeared without a trace because the evacuation was not announced and they did not have time to leave. Someone stayed here for 2 to 3 days thinking that we were all thrown out like kittens. Somebody decided on us without our consent. So now I feel bad for them, but at the same time, where were your voices when the Russians were doing this to the Ukrainians? Darth Putin says if you stop and think about it, if Ukraine had joined NATO, it wouldn't be occupying part of Russia right now. I remain master strategist. So Radio Free Europe is framing it this way. The Ukrainian military has launched a new assault in Russia's Kursk region that analysts say may serve to divert Moscow's attention in other areas while giving Kyiv a trump card. Yeah, I think that's fair. It's actually distracting them. And here they are. They keep advancing in Kursk. You can see it from drone footage. But how are they actually advancing in Kursk? Well, they have such electronic warfare that if drones get close enough, it kind of knocks them out. So drones can only see things from a distance from where the Ukrainians are. According to the ISW, Russian sources are expressing concern about the Russian military's ability to react to Ukraine's ongoing combined arms effort to integrate electronic warfare and long-range strike capabilities with ground operations. So the Ukrainians have figured out how to cooperate to graduate, and the Russians keep sending meat wave assaults. So there's a difference in the way that the two armies are functioning. Now, that's not 100%, but the Ukrainians have seemed to work this out a lot better than the Russians have. So this is a map of occupied Russia, and the gray around it is area that we're not exactly sure who owns that real estate, and these recent attacks are up in the northeast. Now, in the east in Ukraine, the war is yesterday. The Ukrainian army has launched a new Kursk offensive. Me, freshly from Sutsa, silently smiling. Yeah, I mean, it's been quite a shot in the arm. Ben Hodges responded to that, saying the constant dooming by some well-known analyst, amplified by many professional journalists, and taken for granted by the Biden administration, which is now whitewashing its failure, has been a gift to the Kremlin, undermining support for Ukraine. We are lucky Ukraine keeps fighting. That's right. You have to balance both sides of this. And yes, it is tough in the east, but the Ukrainians are also advancing in other areas. Okay, Russians shift to civilian fuel trucks for military logistics amid Ukrainian strikes. Atesh resistance movement in occupied Crimea claims that Russia is adjusting logistics by employing civilian fuel trucks after Ukrainian strikes, arguing that this tactic violates international law. Why? Yeah, of course it does, because this approach jeopardizes civilian lives and breaches the Geneva Convention. So civilians in Russian-occupied territories faced increased risks due to these measures, and the Russians know that, and yet they don't care. Poland is drafting plans to evacuate civilians in case of war or natural disasters, according to the government communique. The plan is expected to be ready within 3 months. It will outline the roles and coordination of civil security services responsible for relocating people to safety. Eastern Europe is taking the threat of Russia very seriously. Now, yesterday, I watched a Lex Friedman interview with Zelensky, took 3 pages worth of notes on it. I'm going to do a short video on it, just showing you some important highlights that you don't want to miss. So that'll be my next video. But when I was done with that 3-hour video, I was just tired. Zelensky revealed in this, and I'm going to talk about this, how Lukashenko actually apologized for the Russian invasion from Belarus in 2022, saying, look, I mean, there was nothing I could really do. I mean, Putin's in charge here. Like, wow. I did not know that that interaction between Zelensky and Lukashenko took place in the early days of the war. Look for that video next. Okay, Darth Putin, if Ukraine attack into Kursk is so pointless, why are we trying so hard to push them out? So that's a good question. You can generally tell by somebody's actions what they really believe. If their actions conflict with their words, trust their actions, not their words. So this Ukrainian defender has saved many, many cats and dogs. Apart from his main job, he saves animals from the combat line and sends them to safety. How many cats have you saved already? That's about the 80th one, he says. All right, my friends. I have for you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes and the shares and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.